Hello, and welcome back to my lecture series on SPACs. Today, we will have a closer look on how those quite interesting vehicles have performed over the last 2 years, or rather how they have underperformed. Now, for a brief introduction on SPACs, if you're new to the topic, strongly recommend to have a quick look at my lecture, link is below, called SPAC 101. It will give you the terminology and the context to follow the discussion in this recording a little bit closer. After a record year in 2021, I think it's time to take a closer look at SPACs. And here is the why. Only 24 SPAC mergers worth $28 billion have been announced so far this year. I'm recording this in April 2022, versus 93 deals worth $230 billion in the first quarter of 2021. So something is clearly not quite working. Let me share with you what I have put together here. I've packaged a group of SPACs that have completed an acquisition in the respective quarter. So what you're looking at right now is a basket of 7 SPACs that merged in quarter 2 of 2020. All you're looking at is the average performance of this basket. So let's have a look how this basically turned out. So pre-acquisition, pre-merger, the SPAC was trading slightly above $10 as it should. We then have an acquisition occurring, and very quickly afterwards there's an initial hype. Usually the sponsors of the SPAC exit at that point. We have then a second round of hype, press releases being announced, and the sponsor will exit with their remaining 50% or may hold on to it. Then basically the excitement very quickly wears off and investors become aware that this acquisition potentially was not in line with their expectation. What we saw then over the last 18 months, that those underperforming SPACs that by now are actually not SPACs anymore because they have been, as we call it, de-SPACed, but let's remain with the terminology. Lawsuits will start, business viability is being questioned, C-suite may be replaced. We're pretty much going through a turnaround situation here. They may try to raise additional funding, they may pivot, and overall investors are starting to pray. Now, you may argue that quarter 2 2020 mergers were a difficult or an underperforming basket of SPACs. So let's have a look. Let's choose a few different ones. Let's look at 41 SPAC mergers that happened in Q4 2020. Doesn't look that much better, does it? So Q2 2021, we had 14 SPAC mergers. And finally, Q4 2021, the most recent one, does not even see that initial bounce. So clearly you have now a little bit more information and context to follow this group of by now de-SPACed mergers and target companies as we go further into 2022. Now, let's discuss very briefly what this may mean going forward for investors. So number one, the regulators are starting to pay attention and have started to come out with suggestions on the naming on the vehicles. Should they be called IPOs? Should they be called SPACs? Should we just call them empty shell companies to make it very clear what the retail investors are buying into? More than 13 mergers involving SPACs have already fallen through in the first quarter of 2022. So it's something to watch because we have quite a large number of SPACs that are still hunting for target companies out there. The main reason for those failed mergers is really the risk of redemptions. as I mentioned in my 101 lecture, investors in SPACs have the right to redeem pre-merger or on merger at $10. Now, some of the SPAC structures are now taking that into account and are trying to come up with incentives that will keep the investors in the SPAC, or prevent them or incentivize them not to redeem. The next part to watch is clearly that target companies are becoming quite aware that there's quite a few SPACs hunting for targets out there, meaning they rarely go with the first SPAC approaching them. So the target companies are wisening up to the new environment. Something to watch for the discerning investor. If you would like to see how this evolves, I will probably circle back to that when we have a bit more historical data. Please subscribe to my channel. Thanks very much for watching. And as always, I look forward to your questions in below the comment section. Thank you very much.